becoming fascinated with your kid, taking notes, journal, become a student of their behavior, because that mix of, both sides of your DNA, it created its own unique flavor. It's completely unique to them. And it's our awesome responsibility and opportunity as parents to get to know those kids for who they are.
You're listening to Men of Faith, the podcast dedicated to calling men up and not out. Join me as we live a life dedicated to our God. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Men of Faith podcast. I'm your host, Caleb Cole, and I'm here with my co-host, Brandon Miller. What is up, Brandon?
How you doing, Caleb? Good to see you today.
Good to see you, man. And you're looking extra studious in the glasses today, so thank you for bringing that.
A little blue light helping the eyes, the screen time we all live in.
If you're going to get blue light, they better look cool. You know what I'm saying?
That's right. That's right. And they better be able to take pictures, because these glasses can take pictures.
Oh, those Ray-Bans where you just go click.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love those.
Well, they talk to you too. So I could Bluetooth in them. I could talk through them. They blue light. Yeah. Real helpful. Got me off earphones for most of the day, which has been nice.
Yeah, I love that. One of my buddies has them, and anytime we go golfing, he makes me put them on and record videos and photos of him hitting his shots. He's like, here, put these on. And I just click.
Yep.
Anyways, that's cool. Well, hey, we're so glad that you came to listen today, Men of Faith. Man, we've been plugging along for a few months now. We're getting so much great feedback. So once again, we just want to invite you guys to be a part of the conversation. You can follow us on our YouTube page. Go to Project Church Sacramento. There's a podcast tab on there, so you can actually watch all of these. I know many of you listen to them on Spotify or iTunes, so continue to listen there, but you can watch them as well if you want to go to YouTube. And then if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. Subscribe to our YouTube, subscribe to Spotify, subscribe to iTunes, and then share these with a guy that you know, a man of faith that you know this would help them and strengthen them. We've been hitting all the topics. I mean, we're just coming out of talking about sex and purity and sex and marriage, and it's gotten spicy up in here, Brandon.
Brown chicken, brown cow. Brown chicken, brown cow.
I think it's what we need in today's day and age. You know, we can't hide from any of these topics. We're all dealing with it. And the unfortunate thing is, in the church, we don't talk about it. And so I'm just grateful for this space, Brandon, this podcast, to be with you on here, because I think we're able to talk about some of the things that we're not talking about enough. And I think a lot of men aren't talking to each other about. And I think today's going to be another one of those topics where Brandon and I want to dive in and talk about fatherhood.
Yeah.
And this is a topic that ultimately many of the men listening are walking through, right? We're fathers. We have many fathers listening to this. I know there may be some single men out there, but I believe this is going to be good for you too, because odds are you're going to eventually be a father. And so, Brandon, I thought it would be powerful for us to talk about biblical fatherhood, what that looks like in 2024, today's day and age. And once again, Brandon and I are, we're in some similar stages, Brandon, because you have a 14-year-old.
Yep.
I have a almost 13-year-old, but you also have kids that are well beyond that, have their own kids, and you have grandkids. I know you spread yours out. I'm in the younger stages with my youngest being 9 years old and in 4th grade. And so there's dynamics of fatherhood that you've learned through the years that I'm still learning in my journey. And so what I think today is us talking about, man, some of the things we've learned as it relates to biblical fatherhood, some of the challenges. I even think, Brandon, it'd be powerful if we talked about the changing of stages, because that's one thing I've learned is I'm kind of in a transition stage right now with now having a 7th grader, and how I'm parenting him is drastically different than it was just a couple of years ago.
Yep.
So talk to me about some of those stages for you, Brandon, as you've walked through it with daughters and sons. I have 2 sons and a daughter. So talk to us about some of the stages and the changes within the stages as it relates to biblical fatherhood,
being a dad life. So 7 children, 4 daughters, 3 sons. I have 3 that are in their 30s, married. One turns 31 tomorrow. The other turns 30 on Saturday. So 2 of them that are hitting the 30s, with kids, and I have a 27-year-old who has 2 daughters, so I have 6 grandkids. And so my early years, which we've talked about on the podcast, been through that stage, teenage, adult, and the ever important for those of you listening that have adult kids, that's a different stage in life. That's a whole other way that you learn to relate. I have 2 daughters that are in their 20s, a 21 and just turned 20-year-old. And right now that's highly intensive stage. As much as they don't live in my home anymore, one's away doing her school, the other one moved out with a sister, but the intensity that I still feel toward them. They're single. I'm thinking about who they're going to marry, how they're being provided for, taken care of. That never goes away. And then I got 2 at home, a 17 and a 14-year-old set of boys who have me firmly rooted in the teenage years. So a junior in high school and an 8th grader. And so stage wise, I would say what you just described, the changing of stages is a really important marker for dads to get used to because it is intended that our kids are going to change. They're going to mature, they're going to grow. God willing, they're going to mature and blossom into the type of person we hope that they become. And I'll tell you, as we go through today's podcast, my wife and I have written 2 parenting books. So we've spent a lot of time thinking about this. And one of the scriptures that we lean into a lot is Proverbs 22:6. If we raise a child the way they should go, when they're older, they won't depart from it. And a lot of times that's interpreted as I'm supposed to raise you in God's ways, and so you'll never depart. And there's some truth to that part, but there's also the reality that I'm supposed to raise my child in the path set for them. What has God called them to? What is uniquely put in them for their mission on this earth? And how do I, as a dad, partner with God as the steward of my kids to cultivate what he's doing? And that is probably the biggest point I can make today is as a dad, recognize your responsibility and recognize your partnership, your place of stewarding what God has entrusted to you because you're not in control. These people don't belong to us. They belong to him. And therefore, as a dad, I think it is a noble aspiration to be the very best one you can. In fact, of all the jobs you do on this earth, maybe right there at being a husband is being a dad, because I don't know that you or I, Caleb, today could put any more weight on the biological, the societal, the spiritual weight that a father has in the life of their children for good or not good. They are bound to us. They want our approval so much. They want us to see them, know them. And so, big part of today, a lot of transitions that we're going to get to talk to about stages, but also just how we maybe show up and how we become aspirationally our very best version of being dads.
Yeah, it's good. I want to go back because I think if we start in these early stages and maybe we kind of walk through them, Brandon, there is a dynamic to how you parent that I don't think I was prepared for. And the dynamic of that is as my kids grow, I have to adjust my parenting. And I don't know that I was fully ready for that because no one ever really talked to me about it. It's just like, okay, you're just thrust into this parenting thing. Suddenly you're pregnant and you're like, well, maybe you had a good dad. So you go, well, I'm going to kind of do it like him. Maybe you had a bad example of a dad. So you're like, I'm going to not do it like that. And I'm going to try to do something different, but I don't necessarily know how to do it different. And so I think for me talking to the men that are in all different stages, I thought it might be helpful if we like walk through the stages of our children. And I know that that first stage, which is the 0 to 5-year-old stage, is the discipline stage. And so for me, that was like the early on was all right, I am nurturing, but I'm also teaching discipline in that age bracket, right? Because they are learning to push boundaries at that stage. They are learning that their voice can say no, right? And that they can fight against the authority. And some of you are late in the game in this, but if in that early stage, I don't set a foundation of discipline that, hey, it is unacceptable for you to act out, to talk back, to reject authority, then they learn that they can dominate and control the narrative based on their behavior. If I entertain, you know, tantrums and yield to what they want because they're throwing this emotional outrage outburst and then they get their desired outcome, I'm reinforcing that behavior. And so I remember early on not liking this, but realizing, man, I have to discipline right now. In this stage, 2 years old, man. And for me, like, I did spank my kids. I know we can talk about that maybe for a moment. I'm not spanking them anymore. They're 9, 11, and 12. I just have transitioned out of that. But when they were young, I probably spanked my boys up to they were 10, but my daughter is 9 and we've stopped. Um, but when they were young and though 2 years old, like 3 years old, 4 years old, I had to teach them that there was a consequence to unhealthy behavior, ungodly behavior, and disobedient, defiant behavior. And I was not going to entertain tantrums and I was not ever going to yield. I mean, we've all been in the grocery store, Brandon, or out in public and seen the mom that's yielding to her child's outburst. Then we've also seen the ones that their child is having outbursts and they're not even addressing it. And that's not healthy either, like to just ignore. There has to be some kind of interaction and addressing of like, hey, this is not the behavior. Can we redirect our emotion? And so I think challenging the men in here that have younger children that like you do have a responsibility to discipline your child, especially in that early stage. And it's something that we don't love. I don't love doing it, but my encouragement is that you would do it not in anger. So that may mean you have to take a moment, say, hey, go to your room. I'm going to come talk to you in a second, or put them in the room. I'm going to come see you in, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Once I have my emotions under control, and then I go discipline, because I think it's we're doing these kids a disservice if we're reacting emotionally to their emotional outburst. So talking about discipline for you, Brandon. Maybe you didn't spank. You're more loving than me.
Definitely did not spare the rod and spoil my kids. I was very aware of what you just said, that in those early years, we were establishing very important parameters for them. And a wise man once told me, he said, every child is born with two primary questions. And the first question a child wants to ask you is, do you love me? And so, of course, any right thinking father or mother would say, with all my heart. The second question a child has for their parents is, will you let me do everything I want to do? A right thinking parent is going to say, absolutely not, because I love you. And so discipline, if it's not seen in the context of love, can be mean. It can be heartless. It can be painful. But in the context of, I love this child and I don't want this child to hurt him or herself. I don't want this child to grow up to a place where they can't be well behaved when it's time for them to go into social settings. I want this child to be able to know proper decorum when they are in a public place like a restaurant or a grocery store. And so that part of parenting is very hard. It's harder depending upon the temperament of your child. And so, something that my wife and I put this phrase together when we wrote our first book. And what it was is learning to turn frustration with a child into fascination. Meaning, when I watch them do what they're doing, when I'm listening, I'm also learning about this child. Some children are very mild mannered, very amicable. They'll do what you say when you ask them to do. And then a parent will have the second child, and it's like, oh my gosh, who took this child's brain? This child challenges me on everything. They scream when when I say yes, they say no. If I say left, they say right. Yes. And the fascination is, wow, we got a strong-willed one on our hands here. Like this one, and there's nothing wrong with the child. This child just has a different temperament, and it's going to take a different path, because if we apply one size fit all to parenting, whether that was how we were parented, how we parented other kids in the mix, or how we've seen it done by other parents, especially with the rise of social media and all the thoughts out there of what you should and shouldn't be doing. Yeah, take all that and then count it as good information that you have to bespoke. You have to be very customized. You have to be very specific to your child, their temperament, their personality, their needs, because Every discipline path is going to look unique to that child. And that's what we learned early on. Our first one was terminally shy, didn't want to talk to anyone anywhere. And so that made her pretty well behaved, actually. Like she was a pretty well behaved kid because she just was quiet. Whereas our second one, super inquisitive, okay? Wanted to get into everything all the time. He's the kid that we had to keep him from sticking his fingers in every light socket available, tearing things apart. Like he was going to hurt himself one way or the other. And he did on occasion because he just
Yeah.
couldn't not touch, could not tear things apart. We used to think he was ungrateful because he would get toys and he would take them apart. But what we realized is he was taking them apart to figure out how they worked, and then we would put them together in new configurations, and he's just that kind of guy. Where our third one, oh my god, this kid challenged us everywhere in every way possible. She was the strongest of the strong, gave us a run for our money. And here's the crazy thing, number 3, it was 7 years till we had number 4, and we thought 3 was tough. And then 4 came along and redefined tough. So I had 2 back-to-back super strong-willed girls, both girls. And, this is where we look at each other like, "Well, they broke the mold," because neither one of us we're both going, "Are we breaking them? Like, what happened? How are they getting progressively more difficult?" If you met my 2 girls today, my 2 in the middle, you would go, "Wow, those are some seriously strong women." And that's who they were at 2. That's who they were back there. So becoming fascinated with your kid, taking notes, journal, become a student of their behavior, because that mix of, both sides of your DNA, it created its own unique flavor. It's completely unique to them. And it's our awesome responsibility and opportunity as parents to get to know those kids for who they are.
My wife and I have struggled with this idea of after our first child, we thought we were incredible parents because he was a rule follower, typical oldest child, rule follower, very black and white, high social acceptance. And so he was just always going to be well behaved. If we disciplined him, he would respond right away. And then you have your second, and he's the complete opposite. And we have boys back to back. I mean, they could not be more different. They are oil and water, night and day, whatever you want to say. And then I'm like, dude, am I a horrible parent for a minute? But it just was realizing their differing personalities. I had to parent them different. I had to lead them different. I even had to discipline them different. I could just look at my oldest wrong and he'd be like, I'm sorry. And then my younger one, I like spank him and he's like, is that all you got? Like,
Seriously. My number 4 was like, what? Almost
yeah,
like I didn't even touch it. Like, "That's it, really? Like, you're just gonna leave me in my room? Okay, whatever, I'll stay in my room." And I couldn't believe the intensity because, like you said, I had others, and it was almost like, man, like, if we started adding up timeouts and spankings and, like, this kid's getting it bad. Well, no, yes and no. It was just different because the compliant one, and here's the challenge, I don't know if you went through this. We had to fight not saying, "Why can't you be more like your" fill in the blank, the sibling. We had to fight to not do that because that creates some real ugly sibling rivalry stuff. That creates lifetime rivalry stuff that is no good. We had to really fight that because in the realization along the path is, no, I don't think there's anything wrong with us. I think this is the package. This is who this is. If the first couple in the Bible had a shepherd and a murderer, I mean, my gosh, like you got the extreme, right?
that's the reality of the discipline stage is learning your kid. I think that's what I loved what you said is you have to be a student of your child. You have to love to learn about your child and love your child uniquely. And we don't compare them because they are so different. My 3 could not be more different because then we have a daughter as the youngest. They are 3 completely unique individuals. And we had to fight that too. Yeah, we're not going to ever compare them and yet I had to discipline them all 3 very differently. And that's what I learned. So shifting gears to that second stage that I want to talk about is the training stage. So you can find this online, but this is one person's interpretation of the stages that kids walk through. So 0 to 5 is discipline. 5 to 12 then is training, where now you begin to train these kids into who they're supposed to be, what it looks like to be a student, a leader in whatever facet of their life. So I started to shift when my kids hit that 5 years old. Now they're in elementary school, right? Now they're going through those elementary years of now I'm having to train them. And training them, obviously there is some training that happens when they're 0 to 5, but I'm more reinforcing the healthy discipline, the understanding of right and wrong, do's and don'ts, rules, and then I begin to train them in what it looks like to be a leader, what it looks like to operate under authority, even at school, to work alongside of other kids. This is when sports start to usually come into the mix, right? And they're learning team dynamics. So, what are some things you did practically for your kids, Brandon, that helped in that training season?
I'll add to your training. I look at that 5-year-old line as further discovery, because in that training process, you're about to find out, what's this personality all about? What's this eye-hand coordination I'm seeing, or interest in this topic, or why does this kid seem to enjoy being alone more than this one who wants to be really social? Like, you start to discover into the school age years a little bit more of what you're going to see probably by the time they hit their teenage years, meaning you're going to see some real emergence of social skills, talent development. Now, this is where you start to notice where the recurring patterns of how they think, how they feel, how they behave, those recurring patterns start to show up, because talent is patterns that, when you invest in them, they become the kids' abilities, right? Their strengths, if you will, right? This is where they start to show you what they do that makes them feel the strongest, right? The most confident, the most capable. So for each parent, each dad, I would say we probably would all vote yes to our kids being confident. We want our kids to be creative. We want our kids to be courteous. We want things for our children that we have to cultivate that. And so in the training process with discovery, it's what you just said. Now you're introducing activities, extracurricular, education. You start to find out, oh, wow, this one is really academic. School comes super easy for them. Look at how quickly they can read and write and, picking up math like it's nothing. I have a genius, right? And you have another kid that's like, school, whatever. When can I go play soccer? When can I go do something else? And so we have to be aware of, we're going to start to find really clear things that they want to do. And here's the big caution. Every single one of us as a dad is imprinted on our kids. It's why when a child is born, they look most like their dads, because biologically it's so that we won't throw them out because we won't think they belong to someone else. So they look like us. We see ourselves in our children. The temptation there is to try to fashion and form them into who we are. So we're directing them down pathways and activities and thoughts like, you're going to be like me. You're going to be really thoughtful and studious and a great basketball player. And you're going to do that, that, that. And then you start to find out, not so much. They don't even want to be out there. This kid is not athletic. So in that discovery, you have to release your expectations. You got to let those go. And you got to embrace, all right, what is it that I see in this kid that God put in there that it's my job to cultivate? Because the one equalizer as a dad is time. You only have so much. In fact, I heard one person once say, you have 18 summers of intense engagement with these kids. Don't waste it. Find things that fit that development for who they are and invest there. And that's what we found in those 5 to 12 years is we're really, really trying to discover, trying to be aware of who they are, what fits for them. That juice is worth the squeeze, because what we learn, and I'll give you two examples, is I have my two daughters I mentioned earlier, the 20-year-olds, really super competitive, very strong-willed one that was in the middle, and then a really sweet, kind, very social, caring, but uber creative kid right after her. And they couldn't look more different, and they couldn't have had different personalities. So I coached soccer for both girls. And one of them is like comp level, played in college. The other one, after like 3 years, was like, I don't like competition. This isn't for me. Like, you have to sweat a lot out here. You run into each other. Why are we running into each other? And we learned with that one, like, oh my gosh, let it go. Like, that's not who she is. She wants to do other stuff. Esteem those things as much as I love the athletic, hard charger one. That's a little more my personality. The other one was, oh, you like to bake. Well, what would you like to bake? Oh, you like flowers and plants. Let's get you more plants. And learning to esteem and value what God put in there.
That's so good. The reality of training them in what they have a natural inclination towards. But then I even heard you say, but there is some training that has to happen for what they're not naturally inclined towards. Because I'm thinking they don't like school, they don't like reading, they don't like math, but ultimately you still got to learn that. You still got to graduate, right? You still got to finish school. And so there may be us having to challenge them in some areas that aren't as natural for them. Like my oldest, we don't check on him at all when it comes to school. I don't check his homework. I don't ask him yet if he has a test because he is self motivated. He's prepared for every test. He finishes all his homework. I honestly can't even do his math at this point. He's in seventh grade. I don't know how to do that. He'll be like, Dad, check this out. I'm like, I have no clue. But my next one, he would not study for any test. He would not do his homework. So we got to check in with him. And I'm trying to teach him to be more self motivated. And so sometimes you have to train them towards what they aren't as naturally inclined towards. And yet, I do love what you said, but also we want to reinforce where they are strong. And my boys, very different. But my oldest so much wants to be like me. I was a basketball player, athlete. Like I was good at every single sport. You put a ball in my hand to this day, I'm probably going to dominate everyone on the field at it, right? I noticed, so he's incredibly musical, which is what my wife is. So, I mean, he can play saxophone, he can play piano, he can play drums. He picked up the drums and in like 2 weeks is incredible. And I'm like, bro, what is happening? Like, we just got you a set. And through the last couple of years, is train him to like, bro, let's lean into your strengths. Don't try to be me. You have a natural gifting and inclination towards this. Why would we not lean into that? And I think that there's this desire to be like our father. And maybe I even put too much emphasis on athletics and I had to shift my focus and go, bro, you're great at this. And I kept going, bro, let me hear you play piano more. Like, play for me, play drums for me. Cause I'm just like, this is a natural gift.
I'm going to say something to that because there's the required and there's the unrequired. So, what you describe with school is the required chores, required acting properly in public, required. There's the required part of discipline back to 1 to 5, right? These are things that just have to be. You're not going to escape primary and secondary school. I don't care which kid of mine there is, you're getting through high school. What you do after high school, debatable. You're an adult. Now, how we do it, homeschool, public school, private school, like, trade schools, like there's a lot of options, but required. And then there's extra. Like, all right, now where can we start to shape what you just described with music? When my oldest was 14, I made the decision to coach him on his first year of football. Now, I was big time football player, my sport, excelled at the sport. So the whole summer building up, I was very excited. And I was expressing my excitement to him that we get to do this. He's going to play. Can't wait to get you out there. First day of practice comes. We go to the sports store, grab him a few extra things, get out to the field. And right as we're pulling up, and I had been really talking him up, all right, son, you got to play like this. And this is how you're a good teammate. And this is how you show up and how you really stand out for coaches. My son at 14, Caleb, stopped me right as we're about to walk out on the field. He goes, "Hey, Dad, I just need you to know that I'm not like you and I'm not going to play football the same way that you did." And it was probably the most sobering and at the same time beneficial moment as a dad I ever had because he could not have been more correct. Played 1 year, didn't love it, wasn't for him. I coached as best I could. He happened to be on a bummer of a team. They didn't win a single game. I mean, they just were not a good team. He didn't have a great experience. He was done. And he went on to do other stuff. And this is my kid that I mentioned earlier, took stuff apart. So he went into like wood shop and mechanic and ended up becoming an electrician and journeyman electrician and now does amazing. And when I look back, I go, man, look at that. His path was so different from mine. And as his dad, I needed to be able to emphasize what has to happen, right? How to treat people, how to be a man of God, how to be a good leader, good follower, good father, eventually husband. He's doing that. He's just going to look different.
We need to hear this as men. because unfortunately, we're trying to live through our kids. I mean, I hate to say it, but and for whatever reason around athletics, there's just a greater desire for us to live through our kids. And I think that this is a reinforcement for guys that are like us, Brandon, who maybe have a natural inclination towards that. But ultimately, if we learn our kids, we go, hey, they're different than me. They may have different calling, dreams, giftings, and desires. And let me feed into that, which leads to the third stage, which is the coaching stage. The coaching stage is typically 12 to 18, right? So now things start to change. They get into middle school, high school start happening. So now I'm coaching them. And what does that mean? Well, now they're kind of in the game on their own, and I'm calling some plays from the sideline, but ultimately they got to execute, right? I'm not there with them going, okay, crossover. Okay, now step to the right. Now go left. No, no, I'm going, you've learned a lot. And now I'm throwing you some plays in the process of your life, but you got to go play the game.
And this is where we have to be so careful not to exasperate them, because parents can start laying heavy, thick expectations on kids around this time. Really thick of what we want for college, what we want for career, how they're going to relate with friends, activities we sign them up for, and or we exasperate them by hands off too much. We're too laissez-faire. We're too give them too much freedom, because at 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, they are literally out of their minds. They are so filled with hormones that they're literally trying to make sense of life with all of these competing feelings, emotions, thoughts, everything's wavering. So we can't be all hands off, but we can't be overhand. We can't be heavy handed, too heavy handed, and you deflate them, right? You affect their ability to make their own decisions, because a big goal, what I heard in coaching, is we're helping them to become responsible. We want them to own their decisions. We want them to take accountability when they learn to say when they've done something wrong, or be okay acknowledging when they've done it right. And on both sides, ownership. Own your stuff, which is for all 7 of my kids, this is the stage where I tell them, look, it's not a question of if your teen will lie to you, it's how many times. What they meant by that is one of the biggest things teens don't want to do, especially in that 12 to 16, is disappoint their parents. They don't want our disappointment because they need approval so bad from us. They need our approval. They want us to know that we see them, we know them, we approve them. And when they lie, what they're doing is escaping disappointment. Whether that's they're lying because they got caught, or did something they don't want to get caught, or lying because they whatever, they're embellishing something. And so I practice this, and this is for those of you listening, you can take or leave it. But I actually told my kids, listen, here's the rule in my house. If you tell dad the truth when I ask, there will be no consequences for whatever I ask. If you lie to me, I'll double the consequences of what I would have done. So your choice is learn to be a man or woman of truth, or learn consequences for lying, or both. And every one of them had to learn both. They all tested it, right? Like, okay, I'm going to tell him. I don't want to tell him. And then they would tell, and it was, okay, I want to pray with you. I want to talk through this. I want to talk through what the natural human consequences are, and we're done. And they're like, that's it? Yeah, you told the truth. We can work with truth. You lie to me, you deceive me, can't work with that because I can't trust you. So this is that age where if you can build that coach bridge where you're safe to talk to, you're safe because you want to be who they talk to. You really, really, really do not want their friends giving them life advice. You don't want their teachers doing that. You don't want even their friends' parents doing that. Even great ones. You hope their pastors do that well. Their youth leaders. But even there, you want to be a trusted source, and the only way you can be that is be safe. Be like our Father is to us. He forgives graciously. Now, my son got kicked out of class last week, my 14-year-old. And the note that came home said if he gets kicked out of class one more time, he's on the list where he can't do any activities. And so we said, well, what happened? He told us, didn't lie. Just here's what happened. Okay. Well, here's what she's saying. And if you do it again, here's the consequence. I can't save you from that. But all right. carry on, do the right thing. And it's because if he keeps going, he'll face natural consequences. But we had the ability to have a trusted conversation. And I think that is in that coaching phase, we really want that.
Yeah, you referenced Ephesians 6:4. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the instruction and training of the Lord. So that's such a, solidification, this scripture of what you said, and you referenced it. But this idea, well, I'm not going to exasperate them, but what am I going to do instead? I'm going to bring them up in the instruction, the ways of the Lord. And so I think that's the foundation here is when I'm coaching my child, it's in the ways and instruction of the Lord. And that's what you were talking about. I'm teaching them honesty. I'm teaching them integrity. I'm teaching them character. And I'm a loving father that is a safe place. I don't exasperate them every time they fall short or don't live up to the standard that I have for them, or aren't even doing what I would want them to do, maybe even in the direction they're taking their extracurriculars. But no, I'm focusing more on the heart, the instruction of the Lord, the ways of the Lord. And I think that's where we miss it as parents, especially, men of faith who are listening to this, who are also fathers, is like ultimately your responsibility is not to get your kid to the NFL or to get your kid to be the greatest musician of all time or the greatest tradesman of all time. Like it is to get them to heaven. Now, obviously, they got to make their own decisions, but how we train them and then coach them and point them back to the heart of the Father, the loving Father, and the character integrity that God intended for them is going to set them up for a healthy relationship with God or not, because they are going to interpret God in a lot of ways in how they see us. And many of us have had to break off those unhealthy father wounds and learn that God is different than our earthly father was. And yet, what if we set an example, not a perfect example, but an example of this is what a loving father looked like? And so, man, the coaching season, I'm just entering into it, Brandon. So this helped me a ton to go, all right, now I'm shifting gears with my oldest to a little more coach and seeing his longing for approval and affirmation from me is only increasing right now, which I thought it would decrease. I'm like, oh, it's going to decrease now that he's 12, going on 13. It's actually increasing. And so I'm trying to affirm him in things other than his performance on a field or even his performance, for him as a musician. Like I'm affirming him in good choices, character, when he's a good leader, when he cares for his siblings, when he cares for his friend, he operates with kindness, when he shows up when other people wouldn't. And so, man, I want to be a better coach, and this helped me in what that could look like. And then the final stage, Brandon, as we wrap this thing up, is the friendship stage. And that comes after 18. And here's my caution to all the men out there is friendship comes when they're an adult. When they turn 18 years old, now you can become their friend. And there's still dynamics to coaching. I know, Brandon, you're even probably still doing with your 20-year-olds. But ultimately, now the relationship changes and there's a friendship dynamic. I think the issue that I see with a lot of men, especially in today's culture, is we want to be our kid's friend when they're 5, when they're 9, when they're 12, when they're 16. And ultimately, like, I am not your friend. Are there dynamics of friendship within our relationship? Probably. But that's not my primary goal or role right now. My primary goal is whatever stage they're in is to execute that stage well as a father. Now he's 18. Now she's 18. Now I can shift to, you know what? There's a friendship dynamic at play. And I'll give you life advice when you ask for it. But ultimately, you got to make your own decisions as an adult. And now I can just support you the best way possible. But I think a lot of fathers I'm watching, they're getting it twisted. They're trying to be their kid friend when they're 4 years old, 5 years old. It's like, you got to discipline this kid, not be their friend.
I was more coach authoritarian, so I didn't have that as natural. It took me time when they became adults to learn to be a friend while still wanting to stay in the place of a trusted advisor. Because what I realized is once they crossed over to adulthood, my advice came upon request and request only. I had to become much less intrusive in terms of when I would offer counsel. and only by request or with permission. And I've crossed that line, and every time I have it, it meets resentment because they want autonomy now, and they should. If we've prepared them well, they should have it. They should be in that role where they are accountable, responsible, and capable of making their own decisions and living with the outcomes. And I want to be there, which thank God I've been really blessed with the relationship with both my children and in-law kids to be a source of advice, to be someone there with that caveat you just said, I can have fun with them. I can do extracurricular. We can go out and laugh and enjoy time away or time at home doing something, family gatherings. And that's huge because then now we've sustained. But the other point I want to offer to dads is I think we're nearing our time here is this. You have a responsibility and opportunity to be the Abraham of your family, to be the man of God, to be a spiritual leader. And of everything we've said today, if you can hold on to being a spiritual leader, be the influence of truth, of scripture, of making right decisions, that will hold your whole life. And it's hard and you have to fight for it because it's easy to put that mantle down. It's easy to step into like, hey, I just want to be here and friends and love the grandkids, but to stay in that role of what you said, Caleb, I want to see my family through to their promised land. I want to see them through. And so for that, I want to be able to offer them godly wisdom, advice, prayers, and be trusted to come to throughout their whole life. And that starts all the way back with where we started today with the discipline phase, being trusted that you have their best interest because yes, I love you. And no, you can't do everything you want to do because I love you.
I mean, that's a great call up, Brandon. Obviously, here at the Men of Faith podcast, we don't call men out, what we call them up. And I think the call up is that you would be the spiritual leader of your home. As men, fathers, you are called to be Abrahams. And I love that you brought it to that because Abraham set the example for generations to come. It was generational legacy. And I know that there are men listening that don't have that healthy generational legacy. It's maybe generational dysfunction. And so that's the call up is that you would be a spiritual leader, an Abraham of your home, where you are setting a legacy of leadership, love, and connection to God. And that everything we do and the way I lead is all back and rooted in the word of God, the person and the love of God. And I'm setting the example as a spiritual Abraham, a spiritual father in my home for my children from when they're 2 years old till they're 18 years old. And then at that point, they go off and I'm actually still a spiritual leader, but my role has just changed. That's your call up that you would set the example as the spiritual leaders of your home. You set the tone. You determine the climate. You are the thermostat of your home. You determine the temperature. And so let's be those men of God that we're called to be, those men of faith, those spiritual leaders. And so this is our challenge to you, men. Thanks for joining us for this Men of Faith podcast on fathering. We're excited. We're actually going to talk next time about what spiritual fathering looks like. So make sure you tune back in. But hey, share this with a man in your life, a man that you know wants to be a greater man of faith. Continue to subscribe, listen. We appreciate you guys being a part of this journey and in this community with us. Love you guys. Keep walking it out as men of faith. Grace and peace. Thanks for listening to Men of Faith. If you've got questions you'd like us to talk about on the show, we'd love to hear from you. Join the conversation by reaching out in the Facebook group, and we will definitely add it to our list. Also, if you want to engage with us at any of our quarterly men's events, you can check out projectchurch.com for more information. Until next time, grace and peace.